Hello and welcome everyone to the Click podcast. This is your host Abhishek Sanone, and along with me is my co-host Abhishek Ajit.
What's
Today
up?
we have Lisa joining us. Lisa is the founder of Bolster Leadership and the core contributor at TalentDAO, and she has done fantastic work in terms of leading research efforts on leadership at TalentDAO. Here she is joining us to discuss her effort and her work in both of these wonderful organizations. So let's welcome Lisa. Hi, Lisa. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. So this conversation popped up, right, at the bottom of the bear market. DAOs are just not doing too well. What was this utopia of decentralized cooperation now has turned into a lot of, how do I put it, a pessimism about DAOs in general, because could have been a utopia of decentralized cooperation, element of leadership is missing where people can step in to make that sort of progress happen and fill up the gaps for these DAOs. But then most of these DAOs in general kind of lack the ability or the practices to have that sort of collaborative or shared leadership. And keeping that in mind, when I took a look at the sort of studies that Lisa was facilitating with Talenda, I really felt that we needed to have her expertise and talk about this very critical topic at this point of time. So Lisa, let's get to it. DAOs right now, they've operated in a certain way. You've seen fantastic collaboration happen across the front. You've seen a new wave of DAOs coming up in general, DeSci, of metaverse, and all of that. But now the bear market has kind of created that lull in the community. And I mean, after we get to your background, I want to understand more about what's your view been on how DAOs have facilitated leadership. So, what has your background been like, and how did you come to the DAO space? Let's start off with that.
Oh gosh. Well, first, the word that I'm hearing thrown around a lot is disillusionment. So, this idea that, DAOs were had so much potential, so much promise. And for the most part, I think even through the crypto winter, the people who are still here still very much so hold that idea close to their hearts. And I am definitely one of those people. However, there is what naturally happens in a progression when you're onboarding to a space. You're excited, you feel like there's so many possibilities. And then lo and behold, as you learn more, you realize the challenges, the things you don't know, the questions that keep coming up with unsatisfactory solutions. And those then become really the turning point where people start to dip into that sense of disillusionment of, can I actually get paid to do this work? Can I really stay fully committed to this idea of decentralization? What does it actually mean for me to have autonomy, but boundaries and clarity of focus and direction? And I think those are very meaningful questions. And it's actually a really beautiful thing that we're in this crypto winter, because winter often for many people is associated with this kind of hunker down, especially myself being based out of Minnesota in the United States. I have heaps and mounds of snow outside right now. And it really does give this feeling of take a pause, reflect, redirect, and find a meaningful pathway forward that honors you and your values. And so that's what I get so passionate about in this space and with this time. And I think it's good that the conversation has turned to one that's a little more pragmatic about what's working, what's not, and how do we just hold those two things up, those two categories, to make a positive path forward.
So, I mean, you kind of hit the situation, the nail on the head, of the existing situation. There's a disillusionment going on, um, a lack of practices around um, key points, around uh, are people getting paid to lead? Is there enough autonomy, and is there these boundaries? We've always heard about DAOs being considered as a future of work, and we've seen so much literature and so much Twitter threads, and the rest. I mean, being spoken about how to orient that sort of collaboration and facilitating the right leadership within these DAOs. But now, as you said, there's a disillusionment that's coming. Let's be frank. Uh, the community is just not, you don't have that sort of sustained community strength when it comes to these DAOs. So what I wanted to understand is, within your time in the DAO space, when you talk about from a, I mean, you've come from a conventional leadership, you've seen everything from that lens of how things have worked in the traditional fronts, and now you've kind of gotten your hands dirty with the DAO space. What is the situation of leadership right now? I've seen a lot of literature that way, but where exactly are the gaps? What are DAOs doing right, and what are they doing wrong when it comes to facilitating that solid leadership within their DAOs currently? What is your observation been like?
Yes. So, I'll share a little bit of my background. You touched on it that, my backgrounds, the majority of my last 15 years have been completely in large corporate contexts, also university contexts, things that are known for being very hierarchical, very bureaucratic. And most of that time, owning and running the leadership development portfolio at an enterprise. So very systems level look, which inevitably also includes the group dynamics of building high performing teams, as well as then the individual dynamics, like one-on-one coaching and trying to understand what your personal values are and how those get in the way, but also can facilitate great progress toward goals. And so all these different layers, the organizational, group, and individual, really need to be focused on in order to achieve total organizational goals. And that's ultimately something that hasn't changed from my work in a traditional context to now working and being and getting my hands dirty, as you said, in the DAO space. Is it still is about this notion of how do you approach those goals. What I think DAOs are exceptionally effective at, which I've seen so many traditional organizations almost try to square peg round hole into, is this idea of crowdsourcing and engaging and building a community around defining what that organizational goal is and how that organizational goal should shift or expand or be experimented with. And that's what keeps me completely fueled by the space, is that there's still no better experimentation playground for how humans are coordinating, organizing, and might evolve the future of work than DAOs. And so that to me is a driving force. And I think that's still what a lot of people find very satisfactory about the space, and what's working well is deep appetites for experimentation, an autonomy for play, an ideal toward doing things differently. And even if it seems like, well, gosh, they've figured this out in other organizations, why can't we just apply how to run effective meetings from what we've already learned over decades of research and personal experience? It almost seems like we hit the reset button and didn't know how to do anything anymore to some extent. And yet, in the same sense, all those frustrations of early DAO organizing, I hold very dear in the sense that I think it's so critical to be maniacally disciplined about suspending our judgments and assumptions. And that to me is what the space is needing to hold on to, that I see in the crypto bear market. It's really starting to digress a little bit into old patterns of, well, this isn't working how we thought it would. Let's just do what we know works well, and let's experiment less, and let's just apply this principle or approach it in this more traditional way because people get it faster, or this is what people want to see, so let's just give it to them. These are the new people entering into the space. They expect onboarding to look like this, so let's just do this, even though it might be boring, or even though it's not really energizing to the people who are already in the community. And so I think there's certain things that I would say really end up being the charge going forward, is to figure out a way forward where we can still suspend judgment and assumptions and educate and help other people do that as well, while also bringing our full strengths to bear. And I see that being a little bit wonky right now, where people are trying to hold on to it, or they're just digressing. And it's not energizing for anyone in the space to do it that way. There's too much tension.
I feel a reason for that sort of tension to come up in the first place is that, see, the entire major conversations around DAOs came up at a time where, you had the bull market, there was a lot of capital flowing across the market, and things, you had an optimistic mindset across the community where things were just kind of, people were just eager. It was unicorn la la land. Everybody wanted to try everything and reset, as you rightly mentioned. And so it was easier to work with them. But then the bull market, sir, but then the bear market came in, and now it's become a, like, sort of a grind mentality, where it's about making sure that things are effective, rather than that sort of harmonious community relationships that you kind of find as a necessity. When, especially now that I work for a couple of DAOs, uh, you kind of had people who were very straightforward with the way they dealt with people, but maybe they were too straightforward that they kind of rub people the wrong way. And maybe you had a lot of community effort come in to ensure that people kind of dealt things in a much more equitable, in a way where people understood that, yes, we have to deal with community in a manner where you have to be kind of empathetic of where they're coming from and how to align them in the right manner. But what happened is that when things get dicey, especially where just recently, you don't even have the runway to pay off your contributors in a couple of months. When things get down to that sort of situation, people just get into that mentality that, yes, we don't have the time, we need to get this done. It's what was supposed to be about fostering community relationships has turned into, how can we do this effectively in the quickest way as soon as we can. And that displays two problems here, that what I feel is going wrong. One is there hasn't been enough thought about balancing that sort of efficiency and effectiveness at it. I mean, it was good that you wanted to foster it in the right way, but if there was a way in which you could have balanced out the effectiveness at that point of time, then these practices wouldn't have needed to kind of iterate to something so old tradition at that point of time. So how do you create that balance? How do you uh, redefine leadership that way to something uh, that's simple for people to use, irrespective of bear or bull market, is what I find is a missing piece right now for most DAOs in general. So what I wanted to understand now is, considering the state of leadership, where, as you rightly mentioned, something that is uh, like, you had autocratic people in these traditional startups, where you had a hierarchy modes, to now something that's more of a holacracy, or a flat mode, where people can collaboratively work. And understanding these pain points that now exist in DAOs, what, in your opinion, is the right definition of effective shared leadership, and how do you create the right blocks behind that?
Yeah, wonderful. This is my favorite topic to talk about, and so I'll try to be brief here, but we'll go maybe start with a definition, go a little more complex, and then come back to the simple pragmatic steps people can take. So one is, I tell people a PhD, basically, it doesn't mean you're an expert. It means you're willing to pay people to be a student, basically. And I have spent a lot of years studying leadership as a practitioner, which is more my focus, because I believe, impact matters in the world. And yet, in order to do that effectively, I've always found myself drawn to academia and looking at work that people have done where they thought so deeply about these concepts and spent time really digging into depths that other people would not even be able to fathom, the time and obsession that people have looking into these very niche topics. And so to me, I love the idea of being this bridge of taking academia and simplifying it and making it pragmatic and useful to people. And one of the things very early on is this idea of leadership. It's kind of like DAOs in the sense that nobody's ever going to agree on a definition. There's not going to be people that are like, this is the one definition that we all can hold hands on and say, this is it. And very similarly, leadership is like that. It's very subjective. Everybody has their own version of what it means to them. And that's what I think makes it so complex and worthy of studying and digging deeper into. And one of the quotes that I really like is from a very traditional management guru, Peter Drucker, that says, leadership is influence, nothing less, nothing more. And for me, when I've looked, and if you look across like there's at least 70,000 individual definitions of leadership academically recorded, which is mind boggling. And if you look at that, almost all of them have the word influence somewhere associated with it. And so for me, leadership is influence in an evolving context. That's basically my personal definition of it, because even what you viewed as being leadership in one scenario that maybe you were really impressed by when you first joined a DAO, a month later, you could be like, what? One person, one vote. I'm not impressed with how that was structured. Or, you might have a very different view of it. And so it becomes, again, something that the evolving context really plays a role in it, and it really matters. And so for me, I believe a lot of what great leadership is within the DAO space, it's really about helping create context and helping have access to building context and creating and co-creating context to be a shared activity and to be a focus even. And so that's true on a personal level. We might want to work anonymously in the space, but we still want people to have a sense of what to appreciate about us as individual human beings. And that, again, requires context, maybe not sharing your gender, your age, where you live, but maybe something about sharing what you're passionate about, why you came to this DAO, why you joined and showed up and want to be here. And those context building activities really matter, I think, especially in a bear market, because it's what builds connections. So that's one thing. If I look, though, at some of the complexity of what we've done at TalentDAO, all this past spring, I partnered with a phenomenal researcher, Mr. Nobody, in Discord. And one of the things that he specializes in is doing research on research. And so I brought the leadership knowledge, he brought the research on research knowledge. It was this match made in heaven. And what we did is we looked at the past 25 years of recent history, going really in depth on about 40 different systematic analyses or reviews and meta-analyses, which are basically fancy research ways of saying studies on studies that look at quantitative results and across all these different industries. And in total, it represented 5,400 primary studies, hundreds of thousands of individuals across thousands of organizational contexts that we believe these insights are genuinely generalizable to even DAOs. And that was really our thought about looking back at shared, distributed, and collective leadership. And what can we learn from what all of academia has done recently to tell us about what it takes to cultivate shared leadership, since we know that's really the charge of DAOs. It's not to have one person with a position and a title be the leader. It's not about the leader. It's about each person showing up as a leader and understanding their own strengths, what they can contribute and offer to that moment. And so it's much more of a dynamic process, and it's much less about a title or role or static assignment. And so that's one of the things that we know very deeply, is that DAOs demand this more dynamic nature to it. And so a lot of our research basically came up with three basic things. Here's your practical 1, 2, 3. Your three basic things in order to cultivate shared leadership within your DAO. The first of which is shared purpose. And I don't think it surprises anybody that we need to have like our vision basically determined and figured out. That becomes exceptionally important. The other thing that we need to do is have social support. And that one hopefully resonates a lot with people,
What
listening,
is
with
social
people
support?
in your DAOs. In its simplest form, it's the idea that if you need help, there's someone there to lend a hand.
Okay. Does that also include some form of financial, social security, like a welfare within the DAO as well, or is it just primarily how can the community support each other in terms of just plain socialization?
Yeah, I think it could mean that. I think for each DAO, it would look different. To me, it's about Truly, like if somebody's stuck, like it could be as simple as having a channel on your Discord that says like, hey, ask any question here, or where you can actually get the sort of technical support that you need. That would be the super baseline. But then there's the, of course, more graduated needs. That to me is about acknowledging contribution. It's about appreciating, whether that be through compensation, whether that be through increased responsibility within the DAO, whether it's extra access or ownership of certain things within the context of your DAO. But there's lots of things that show that you socially support someone. For me, what it's looked like is genuinely having people to think through and collaborate on work with that I can depend on, that I know they're going to show up week after week, just like I'm going to show up week after week. I'm not floating out there on my own. I've got maybe a raft, maybe I'm still floating, but my raft is connected to a bunch of other rafts. And so it feels a little bit more safe and supported.
At least you won't be like Jack of the Titanic, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not going to, just drown in that ice sea right there.
Yeah.
And what is
Yeah.
the third one, by the way?
Yes. Okay. So again, first one is that idea of shared purpose. Second one is social support. And then the third is your ability to impact and influence the future. And so that again becomes very important when it comes to governance, tokenomics, how we incentivize human behavior, and how people see a path to contribution or even a sense of agency over their ability to impact the DAO's future.
All right. So, in general, I find that these three values in general kind of make sense for the DAO as well in order to facilitate that sort of leadership. But uh, from a theoretical perspective, but then you take an observation of what's going on within these DAOs. Uh, in general, uh, how do you kind of most of these DAOs, what they lack is a context of what's going on within their of their vision, because these DAOs are so nascent, right? They're not like major traditional corporations that have had hundreds of years to be able to stick to um, a certain vision for a long period of time. Here, it started off by enthusiasts, by pseudonons, don't even come from the same background, and they are also stepping into a field where you're literally talking the frontier of cutting edge tech. So, and that too, you don't have that sort of runway like the traditional startups to kind of create that sort of practices from get go. These people. The traditional corporations, what they have is an entire um, like 30 to 40 years of practices that they rely on as a habit, as an unconscious thing, and those in order to kind of make it equitable, you're kind of like as you rightly mentioned, you're like revamping how things are kind of working out functionally at the bottom. But then the collateral damage is that a lot of these key fundamentals that worked out for these traditional corporations just get missed out. I mean, you take a look at DAOs in general. Okay, people want to work, in a collaborative manner. How do you ensure that authority is given out to the right person without jealousy coming in, with the right set of context sharing? All of these are still big question marks across DAOs. And one more thing is social support, as you mentioned. When things get dicey, I don't think that even comes in the picture, let alone I don't think there's even a proper documentation of how you can support each other. It's just about are we paid well enough? Do we have the sort of runway for at least the next couple of months? And all of these just get lost in the equation and we're back to square one. You don't have a North Star for working collaboratively, that sort of document across DAOs, and that's fundamentally how leaderships can step in. And as you mentioned, how another aspect that I found missing is because there's no documentation, leaders just keep coming and going. There's so much confusion, that I've seen so many DAOs just get frustrated with the way the contributor pathway exists right now, and they're going back to a core team approach, the very approaches in traditional startups that you wanted to get away from. So, these fundamental pain points have never had the right practices that kind of worked for a community, and we'll get to that point later. But I want to talk about the first thing itself. Let's talk about the shared purpose itself. The shared purpose is something, I feel, if it is set in stone, at least for a period of time, it kind of creates the right operational mentality for people to come in and get the tasks done well. But then the issues with DAOs are that when you have so many people who come in to take care of that particular vision, I mean, everybody has their own subjective vision, everybody has their own views for culture. But that's not the case for a traditional corporation. They must have had that vision set by a founder 100 years ago. I mean, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, all they're doing is iterating that vision according to what makes sense now. But DAOs are having to start it from scratch. So my question is, when you've kind of worked with TalentDAO right now, you've seen all these DAOs kind of create a vision that makes sense for your particular DAO or something. How do you ensure that these key tenets like vision, like culture, like core values are kind of expressed in a collaborative way? And once it's set, how do you ensure that people stick to it and work on it rather than just reworking it and losing out on broader operational efficacy? Because what I find a problem is people tend to work on the culture, they work on the vision, and they spend so much time deviating from that, that the key tasks that were supposed to the fundamental work is just being lost out. So how to do it in the right manner?
Mm, mm. Yeah, so it is being lost out. Let me use TalentDAO maybe as a little case study here to play with. So we had
Awesome.
two primary co-founders, and they really started with this idea of, gosh, what if we brought peer-reviewed, great, high-quality scientific knowledge to the DAO system, but as a DAO, we're going to actually go through it ourselves as we study it. So that way we're not outside consultants looking in, but rather we're really, we're part of the grand experiment that we're studying. And they just published a simple tally form. I, as well as a few others, were very, very early ones to fill it out. It had like a random panda on it. And I was like, yeah, they seem like my people. and and they just had a very basic idea that we were going to look at how to do research, and think about how to do that well in this new emergent space. I'm all about leadership development, all about future of work. And I was like, I had just finished my PhD in 2020, and I knew I wanted to continue researching leadership, but wasn't I was disillusioned with that system. I thought to myself that, gosh, I did all this work along with so many other people, and basically it ends up being not accessible or very difficult to navigate to, and even has a price tag associated with most scientific literature out there. And so there's got to be a better way that I can do research in a way that aligns more to my values of transparency and accessibility. And this seems like a really good home for it. And so there was 6 of us that all had our very subjective, very different point of view on why we were coming to TalentDAO. And we all kind of organically came there. And I actually didn't know the co-founders very well at all beforehand. A LinkedIn connection was the only tether there. And so when we all got together, we realized there's about 6 to 8 of us. And I think there's maybe 6 of us that published the manifesto together. And that to me is a really powerful thing, is you put your purpose and idea out there. But once you establish that core team, that early 6 or 8, that you actually reimagine your manifesto as a collective versus having it hang off of the 1 to 2 founders that were there early. And I really commend the way we approached that. Was diverse perspectives spread all over the world. And still, that is the cultural makeup of our DAO now that it's expanded to over 1,000 people, is very, very focused on doing high quality, rigorous research, immensely productive, prolific, and tenured backgrounds for the most part, but also exceptionally welcoming to new people who may not have a research background and yet want to do research in a different way and want to evolve it into its next chapter. And so for me, that's still what's energizing about the TalentDAO community, is it looks a lot like the expansion of that early core team. So for me, it's about bring people in that you want the larger community to look like eventually, because that diversity and intentionality upfront is worth its weight in gold. And so I get really excited about that in particular when it comes to laying down a purpose that people can believe in and that won't change with the changing winds so much.
I mean, I find that fascinating. I mean, what was once a vision of two, three founders eventually turned into an iteration by the broader collective in general. My question is when, see, the thing is, this is not an easy conversation to have. This is something that requires the involvement of the community, and there's a lot of mind space given to that that takes away time from work. On one hand, you need to have an understanding of what the community wants, and is it also kind of compatible with the original vision and the core team, or maybe not probably what's in the interest of the community, but it shouldn't be done at a constant, probably on a monthly basis where it just keeps taking mind space, So if I'm a DAO right now, say that what was once a 10% core team has now turned into 100, it will turn into 1,000. So, on what basis, in terms of timelines, in terms of the community size, or what is the signal that I should consider that makes me feel that yes, it's time to reevaluate the vision, it's time to reevaluate the core values and things like that? Because people wait for things to really break down to have this conversation. But how do you start predicting it and start having those signals ready?
Yeah, I think one key way that TalentDAO is starting to approach that more and more is we developed over the course of the past year with a lot of our data scientists a DAO health survey. And it's essentially what you might think of in a traditional context as an engagement survey, but that sort of data about your community and how it's thinking, thriving, wounded, whatever it might be, is very, very critical to take a snapshot of and to understand and to pulse as your DAO evolves. The other thing that I would say is one method that I think is exceptionally powerful in any organization that's deeply underutilized, but actually has a lot of value alignment with DAOs, is the open source protocol of appreciative inquiry. And appreciative inquiry is positive psychology based. It's basically strengths based processes. And one of the steps that it does is it really looks, and this can be a facilitated process, but it could also be done asynchronously if you just opened up a channel for it within your DAO, is looking at when are we at our best. And it allows for people to contribute stories and times of when you're at your best as a DAO. And so you think about the organization, it's a great chance for people to share and acknowledge and appreciate good efforts that are happening, but it also gives people who are responsible for the overall health of the DAO a lot of indications of this is where things are working well. And that I think is something that people are not sourcing those stories and they're at a deep loss for it because that's actually your future trajectory. It's not about whack-a-mole on the things that aren't working. It's about amplifying what is.
Okay. So, and this DAO Health survey that you mentioned, I mean, you mentioned that appreciative inquiry is what's necessary here, and that makes sense. Probably having the community participate in what is the general is there alignment around vision values or something. If there isn't, what exactly is your view of how it should be done? You kind of create a consensus around that and probably move it to proposal. That kind of makes sense. I'm just putting a hypothesis just for the sake of discussion. I mean, probably when you have a hypothesis done this sort of survey done every 6 months, and if there is a deviation, a market deviation away from what you believe is a consensus number, then we start having this discussion out in the open public where people can contribute, and on the basis of that you can probably reach some sort of agreement on, yes, this is the vision values, and maybe we can have this conversation over the next signal, maybe in another 6 months. Does that make sense? And how does this sort of conversation happen in a traditional startup or in a startup? Because that's where you kind of find the sort of reworking happen more often. Have you come across such moments in your studies?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In all my experiences, purpose is really centerpiece to any beginning of any organization. It's the reason you exist. And so that's a really important question to answer because that's what's going to attract people to what you're doing. When in doubt, go back and start with that. If you do not have that clear as a DAO, that should be your priority. People want to know what's the goal, then what's my role? Like those are the two foundational questions that if you can't answer that, don't worry about processes, structures, governance, tokenomics. The first couple of things should be what's the goal, what's my role? And once people have clarity on that, you can move to the structures, processes. Every 6 months, I think is a good time to reevaluate, take stock. And at the same time, I know there's a lot of people who would roll their eyes at the idea of like a twice a year mid-year review or an annual review sort of process. That's like some of the stuff that I think we're maybe excited to do a little bit differently. Even the large bureaucratic organizations I worked for tried getting away from that and tried moving more toward a culture of pulse surveys. I mean, we have so much tech, we have so much data. How can we build dashboards that give us real-time insights to this? And I think it's really good to do something like a DAO health survey in the sense that it really helps you get that dashboard view when you don't have something dynamic and we just quite haven't gotten there yet. But that is absolutely something that I think needs to happen in this space that is just following a very almost traditional trajectory in the sense that we were not really doing feedback or using data on our DAO. Now we're looking at it a little bit more and have some ways to do that, like health surveys. But to me, the ideal goal is also one where I don't think there's one organization out there that's not seeing some value in the idea of creating a learning organization where people are open to and giving and asking for feedback. And that's actually one of the most important things you can do is cultivate a culture where people ask for feedback, not give it. We're great at giving it because that puts us in a power over structure, but actually being people who show up and practice the leadership capability of asking for feedback, I think would be phenomenal to see happen more in DAOs.
Absolutely. And I feel that, yes, we can revamp how this sort of feedback is asked through the sort of pulse surveys and probably even better ways of executing over tech, and maybe even the right set of incentives. I mean, if you take a look at some of these communities that have tokens now, they give off, tokens for contribution for fixing a bug. But when it comes to these sort of conversations which can actively reshape how the DAO is going to fundamentally work, and your opinion is much more fundamental than fixing a stupid tech bug or probably writing an article. There's no sort of incentives given out for making these processes much more robust. And definitely, there should be some sort of review of how things are done. Maybe a form of reputation system and tokens for these sort of extremely high priority conversations at the right intervals could be kind of critical for that sort of thing. And yeah, but one thing that makes me think is, right now you have contribute, as you mentioned, contributors should be participating in these sort of surveys at a frequent time. But look at the DAO situation right now. You take a look at the complaints across the board. What are the problems that you keep find highlighted over Twitter? My God, there are so many lurkers. There are very few contributors. Most, the entire community, the participation is just kind of fizzled out. My God, people are just not getting paid. A contributor just comes in a month and they probably disappear in another month. These are the sort of issues DAOs are struggling, in spite of the narrative being that, oh my God, this is collaborative work, everybody gets a say, and this is far more equitable than what we've seen with traditional startups and corporations. But people are running away from it. Now we're seeing polls come up where, please, you have votes over decentralized governance and cooperation and all of that. Now people have just gotten so exhausted, they're like, please give us a master now, we just want to see some money on the table. How did we get to this point where there's so low participation, so much burnout? You've kind of observed so many DAOs at this point. How did we get to this point, and what should DAOs do to fix it?
Oh gosh. I mean, for each DAO, I've observed enough DAOs to know that each DAO is very different and comes with its own set of complications. But that leadership is really at the core of a lot of them. And so a lot of the solutions you'll hear me say are very, very focused on leadership. And yet, How did we get here? We got here because there was a lot of energy thinking it would take us up a mountain, and instead we're kind of on this downslide. And I do think the macro environment needs to be, even though we've mentioned it multiple times, it's definitely still a part of the narrative, that all the things we told our friends and family of, oh my gosh, you have to get in now. This is the bottom. You're so lucky. This is such a great time to get into DAOs. You'll be able to grow with them. That actually, no, it's just kind of been at the bottom and the bottom's gotten a little bit deeper. And so it can wane on someone's confidence. It can wane on what they believed was a good path forward. Doubt can creep in. And like I said, when people are under pressure, the actual neuroscience behind it, right, is that when you're exhausted and you're under pressure, you actually cut off your own access to your prefrontal cortex, that executive functioning part of your brain that makes great high quality decisions and creatively thinks. And instead, you go back more into your limbic system, the mammalian brain, where you're more animalistic and just kind of like fight, flight, freeze mode of trying to survive. And so I think what's happening across DAOs is very natural, that when resources are highly constrained, that we're feeling pressure and we don't always show up as our best selves, our most creative and our most optimistic, when that's the environment that we're in.
Yeah, the whole part of the frontal cortex thing got me thinking. I think before I enter Discord, I think I should have a little bit of a routine. Take a deep breath. Okay, it's time to access Discord now, people. But yes,
Totally.
but the thing is, I find that aspect intriguing, that people, when things, these issues happen because of a lot of stress. I also would like to say that, these aspects about burnout because of money, burnout because of stress, fundamentally, the leadership aspect that is missing is the ability to stay calm during these sort of situations. That comes from experience and of having dealt in that sort of situations that most contributors don't have. I mean, most contributors come from so many different backgrounds. That's not coming from a startup leadership or a corporation leadership. That the way of handling these sort of teams for a dicey situation like that is missing. And probably with time, if they stick around, maybe they learn from that. Right now, it's not there. That's why you see all this burnout. That's how I feel. Things have kind of, and another aspect that kind of makes sense about why the stress happens. um, I've been kind of a yoga thing, and my guru would say that the fundamental reason for stress is you don't understand, you're not able to accept the situation for what it is, you're not able to see the situation for what it is. That is why you don't get what to do, because you're so filled with uncertainty. That's why the stress comes in, because you don't know what to do next, because you're not able to see. And the problem with leaders today is, fundamentally across the broader DAOs, they don't know how to sustain the DAO. If they knew how to have that sort of right business models, or how to act in those sort of situations, then kind of guiding the broader team to that sort of, guiding it past that situation would have been a lot more easier. Granted, there are no hard and fast rules, especially in a complex dynamic market like this, but still, you have a set of habits that can take you through to find that answers. And probably the sort of work that you're doing can kind of give us that sort of practices,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
are easily documented.
Yeah, I mean, even to add to that, so one of the things that doesn't change, that we believe we know from the past 25 years of research, that we believe generalizes to DAOs as well, is that leadership, you can basically break it down into three main sections. There's, of course, self leadership at the center of it all. And even when I'm now doing primary research of interviewing DAO leaders, it's very clear that people are like, people in DAOs, you need to do your own work. As the DAO evolves, you need to evolve yourself. And so self leadership is absolutely at the core. But there's also change leadership, people leadership, and task leadership. And those are so foundational across any time you're looking at leading an organization at that org and group and individual level. Those are the summarizing buckets of what leadership looks like. And for me, if I were to share the tips of what leadership is needed in DAOs, it's really, there's almost like one activity associated with each of those as a baseline. Do this and you'll be better off than 90% of DAOs out there. And one of those is around people, is this notion of appreciation. You absolutely need to be able to, I tell people, appreciate to accelerate, because that is what's going to keep the energy within your DAO. And if people are feeling energy, they're going to show up and they're going to contribute. And so this idea of how do you lead people, sometimes it's as simple as gratitude and appreciation. And so don't underestimate how far that can go, especially if you're a DAO that's hurting from a compensation standpoint, which is remarkably a lot of them. And then the other thing is task. The activity there is really about clarification. This is something that I think, again, people think they've said it once or twice, or they posted it on a Notion page and so people know about it. No, they don't. If you are a leader, and by leader, I don't mean in a position of power, I mean somebody who's got a platform of influence within the DAO, please use that to clarify and have your drumbeat, have it be a clear, succinct message that you want people in your DAO to have. And maybe it's that, I mean, for example, I think people in the Ethereum community could say it's about biddling right now. That in the crypto winter, what do? We build. And there's something so simple about almost this rally cry of this is what we're going to focus on. And that's at a very generic level. For your DAO, hopefully there's more specific things you want people focused on or contributing to. But that needs to be your drumbeat. And if you don't have one, start off with just having it be your purpose and the reason why you exist, because that should always be a drumbeat that finds its way in. And then the third one around change and leading change within a DAO is really this idea of imagination. So you have appreciation, clarification, and the last one, imagination. And this is the one that can be hard when things, resources are constrained, is helping people to continue to see that brave, bold, bright future that excites us, that keeps us coming back, but also different possibilities for how we can think differently about the work we're doing. An example of this was at TalentDAO. We realized that we're not just conducting research, but that research itself could be turned into an NFT that then we potentially stake with Ocean Protocol. And so there's all these different new ways of doing the work. There's new levers to pull. And if we just hunker down and go back to what we know, we're going to miss out on so much of the imagination and the excitement and adventure that brought us to this space in the first place. And also, this is a time where we can define what that looks like, because the people here are really, really wanting to figure out how we make it better. And so to me, that's what I get excited about is helping people figure it out and then helping onboard the next people to what that mindset, skill set, and tool set looks like.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. I mean, we just kind of bracket leadership as this one step, but in reality, there are a lot of aspects to consider, of how do you lead? How do you lead yourself? Because if you're not taking care of yourself, then how do you lead others? If not in the right shape, then you can't lead anybody. So self leadership is pretty critical, and leading people, leading change, having that sort of if not a like a research study at least, but at least the basics of what's necessary in any of these key situations when you step into the role. I think that would be critical for any sort of DAO to have, especially when if that could be integrated within the onboarding itself, because most people don't come from that sort of background, and we all come from so many different life situations and all of that. We may not, I mean, see, I'm probably very straightforward. Maybe the community is not like that. How I handle change is way different from what the community expects. So probably having that documented would be pretty critical that way, and pretty amazing, to that you're kind of leading the efforts on that front to just have that documented for future leaders to step in. And as I mentioned, it's not easy for leaders to just kind of that whole self leadership part is missing. You tend to, I mean, I keep hearing this comment. I give out so much to the community that I don't even find myself existing in the picture here. It's you kind of give and give, and you do so much for the community that you're just not in the game. and that leads to a lot of burnout, especially considering the bear market right now. What exactly is your advice for staying sane with your community, even though they're all good intentioned people, but still you've got to take care of yourself, right?
Yeah. I think, and maybe this will be contentious, but have a life outside of DAOs. Like have some of your community not be really into Web3 like you are. I think that's necessary. I think it's necessary to have that balance in your life, have people to pull you away, to encourage you to disconnect. In 2020, before I knew about DAOs, my husband and I created Bolster Leadership. He's been in the board game industry this whole time, and I've been in leadership development. So we put our products together. But part of what we wanted to do was decentralizing leadership development. So the DAO ethos was already there. And yet it was also to help people disconnect from being online. So we had these very tactile, cards that basically were like a coach in a box that as you draw cards, you develop your self leadership and on things like prioritization and communication and navigating change. And to me, that's still where I always begin with my own personal practice, and what I'd always advise to other people is have a life outside of DAOs, have your boundaries about what hours of your day you're going to be disconnected. I actually just rearranged my phone, so all my DAO apps and everything are on one and the very last screen. So after a certain hour, I do not allow myself to flip to that screen where I'm going to see all the things that are happening. Twitter on there as well. So it's about setting those personal boundaries, and I think that it cannot be underestimated, and it's going to look different for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. I think in my case itself, I'm kind of addicted to Discord at this point. You'll have to refer me to a rehab center at this stage. But in general, what I've seen some intriguing things. Yes, you need to have your own space where you get to do your own things, and probably just demarcate your life and your other priorities away from the DAO space. I've seen some pretty cool. Um, examples where DAOs have kind of put that into practice. I just recently was lurking at Songcamp's Discord lately, and what they did was for Christmas, they took 1 month complete off from any sort of Discord activity. That means the entire Discord is completely shut down. No one is talking except for any sort of very high priority thing, and that's also not there. If we could see some sort of disconnect mode across the board, that just kind of gives people more time to just kind of relax and just come back and deal with the situation with a fresh mind. It's been a fantastic convo so far, Lisa. I mean, I really appreciate the sort of insights that you've given about leadership. And I would love to know, and for the general audience itself, tell us more about what can we expect from your work with Bolster Leadership going down the line, and what can we expect with TalentDAO, and if there are any sort of operators who feel that they may want to collaborate, what can they expect from you?
Yes, absolutely. So when it comes to Bolster Leadership, the way to think about that is the self-leadership. So I encourage you to check out bolsterleadership.com. If our whole purpose is about bolstering the development of all people. And so if this resonates with you, I'd love to have you reach out and connect with me. I'm Lisa Wocken on all socials, so that's going to be the primary way to contact me for any of these things. But yes, so Bolster Leadership, what you can expect is that we're going to continue to push the edge on building those leadership capabilities that are timeless and timely, that we think are effective to just humans operating within the DAO space more effectively. And TalentDAO, what we're really looking at is we're looking a lot more at that systems and group dynamic. And so a lot of the research I'm doing right now with another really wonderful researcher, we've had an international research team that's now interviewed 23 leaders and primarily founders within the DAO ecosystem that are from really, really wonderful DAOs, like everything from the DeSci space with LabDAO to really cool DAOs that partner with external large organizations like MoonDAO, to then some of the tried and true like Bankless, Gitcoin, DeFi like UMA. And so really, really wonderful that we conducted these interviews in a way that's highly confidential, because what you'll find, and hopefully what we'll be sharing more about at ETH Denver in a couple months from now, is the insights from these confidential interviews where people talk about what's really working, but also what's really not, and some of the gripes about the space, but also what we can do about that to cultivate leadership to address those pain points.
Oh, that's pretty neat. Yeah, you're going to. I mean, I would really love to hear about what sort of insights have come out from all these interviews at ETH Denver. Could we get a teaser of that presentation for the Click podcast before ETH Denver?
Yeah, I'll see what I can do. Maybe I can give you a couple slides. That would be fun. Yeah.
Oh, that would be pretty amazing to have. With that, we kind of end the convo. It's been a phenomenal, like kind of a rant in general by my side at least, but from your side at least, it was a kind of a fun, insightful convo about leadership in general. I can't wait to see your study. I can't wait to see your presentation about leadership, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of your work with Bolster at some point. Really enjoyed the convo. Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.